My name is Sera Donovan. I am 29 years old. Let me start with the call. Not the call 3 years ago, when I was standing in the rain outside a house in Limerick, Ireland, with a suitcase and 7 months of pregnancy, and the specific weight of what had just happened settling into my body, alongside the weight of the child who was moving inside me, as though to remind me that whatever else was true, this at minimum was real, and mine, and coming regardless. I want to start with a different call. The call that came 14 months ago, on a Tuesday evening in April at 9:47 at night, when I was on call at the maternity unit of University Hospital Limerick and had been on call since 7 that morning and was drinking cold coffee from a paper cup and reviewing the notes on a first-time mother who was 36 weeks and whose blood pressure readings from the afternoon were the specific readings that required the particular close attention that blood pressure in late pregnancy always required. The call came to my personal phone, not the unit line, and when I looked at the screen, I saw a name I had not seen on my phone in 3 years. Noreen Donnelly, my mother-in-law. I looked at the screen for the particular number of seconds it takes to decide whether to answer a call from someone you have not spoken to in 3 years. The specific calculation of someone who understands that the call is coming for a reason, and who is assessing whether the reason is something they are prepared to receive. I answered. She said, "Sera." I said, "Noreen." She said, "It's Bridget." Bridget was her youngest daughter, 23 years old, who had been in the 3rd month of her first pregnancy the last time I had any information about the Donnelly family. She lived with Noreen and her husband Padraig in the house in Limerick, from which I had been asked to leave 3 years earlier. I said, "What's happening with Bridget?" She said, "She's in labor, early, at home." We called the maternity unit and they said it's still the early stages, but she's in a lot of pain and she's frightened and she asked for you specifically. I said, "She asked for me." She said yes. I said, "How far along is she?" She said, 37 weeks and 3 days. I said, "How long has she been contracting?" She said, "Since about 7, 3 hours. They're close now. Maybe 5 minutes. I said, "Is there a community midwife?" She said, "She's been trying to reach one for an hour." No answer. The unit said they couldn't send anyone out for another 2 hours at minimum because of the staffing situation tonight. I said, "What does Bridget want?" There was a brief, specific silence. Noreen said, "She wants you. She said you're the only midwife she trusts." I want to tell you what I did with the specific 4 seconds of silence that followed that sentence, because I think the 4 seconds are the center of this story, and they deserve to be described accurately. I thought about 3 years ago. I thought about rain and a suitcase and 7 months pregnant, and the particular words that Noreen Donnelly had said to me in the hallway of her house, the words I will describe to you fully when I take you back to the beginning, because they deserve the full context that the beginning provides. I also thought about Bridget, who was 23 years old and 37 weeks pregnant and frightened and contracting every 5 minutes, and who had asked for me specifically. I said, "I'm coming." "What's the address?" She said, "You know the address." I said, "I know. Tell me anyway." She told me. I said, "I'll be there in 12 minutes. I put the phone in my pocket and I finished the cold coffee and I went to the unit coordinator and I told her I was responding to a home birth emergency, a multi-Paris situation at 37 weeks, and I gave her the address and I left. Before I take you to the house in Limerick and what happened there and what Noreen said to me in the hallway afterward, let me take you to the beginning. Because the beginning is where the specific shape of everything that follows was established, and because the beginning is where I first understood what kind of family I had married into, and what the understanding would eventually cost and what I would build from the cost. I grew up in Ennis, County Clare, the second of 4 children born to Tommy and Mary Donovan, who had run a small hardware shop on Abbey Street in Ennis for 28 years, and who had built their family in the particular way of Irish families in small towns in the West, organized around the local community and the church, and the specific warmth of a household where the door was always open and the table was always set for whoever needed to be at it. My father was the kind of man who fixed things. Not only in the shop, though in the shop he could find the specific part for any domestic repair anyone in Ennis could describe, but in the particular sense of someone who understood that most of the difficulties people experienced in daily life were the difficulties of specific systems that had stopped working correctly, and who brought to every such difficulty the calm competence of someone who knew how to assess what was wrong and what the fix required. My mother was the kind of woman who fed people. Not only food, though she fed extraordinary quantities of people, extraordinary quantities of food over the years, but in the particular sense of someone who understood that people's needs were often most legibly expressed in the specific way they showed up at other people's tables, and who responded to those needs through the sustained and specific nourishment that was her primary language of care. I grew up understanding that you fixed things and you fed people, and that the fixing and the feeding were the specific forms of love available to people who understood that love was not primarily an emotion, but a practice. I became a midwife. The trajectory from the hardware shop in Ennis to the maternity unit in Limerick is not as indirect as it might appear. My mother had her fourth baby when I was 11 years old, a home birth attended by the community midwife who served our area, a woman named Bridie, who had been delivering babies in County Clare for 30 years and who came to our house on a February morning and attended my mother through the labor with the particular calm competence of someone for whom this was not a crisis but a specific professional situation that required specific professional skill. I watched Bridie work. I watched from the doorway of the bedroom where my mother was laboring, and I watched someone who understood exactly what she was doing and who communicated that understanding to my mother through the specific quality of her presence, which was the presence of someone who knew what was happening and what it required, and who was not frightened because the knowing and the competence together produced the specific assurance that was the most useful thing she could offer. The baby came. My youngest brother, Cian, who is now 19 and studying engineering in Cork, came into the world in our house in Ennis on a February morning, and Bridie caught him and handed him to my mother and said, "There he is, Mary. There's your boy." I decided that morning. Not consciously, not in the specific articulated way of an adult making a career decision. In the particular way that children decide things, which is by understanding something in their body before they understand it in their mind. I went to university in Limerick for nursing, then to the specific midwifery program, then to my qualification, then to a position at University Hospital Limerick, where I had been working for 2 years, when I met Connell Donnelly at a mutual friend's birthday gathering in a pub in the city centre. Connell was 28, a structural engineer who had grown up in Limerick and who had the particular quality of someone whose intelligence was organized around problem-solving and whose warmth was specific and directed, the warmth of someone who paid attention to the people he cared about rather than performing warmth for general consumption. He was funny in the specific way I find most genuinely funny, the way that comes from accurate observation rather than performance. He asked me about my work with the particular genuine curiosity of someone who found other people's expertise interesting rather than threatening. We dated for 18 months. We got engaged in the summer. I met his family at the engagement dinner, organized by Noreen at the Donnelly family home in Anacati on a Sunday afternoon in June. I want to describe the Donnelly family dinner accurately because I think the accuracy is necessary to understanding everything that followed. Noreen Donnelly was 58 at the time of the engagement dinner. She was a woman of specific and considerable social intelligence, the kind of intelligence that understands the exact positioning of every relationship in a room, and that manages those relationships with the practiced expertise of someone who has been the central figure in her family's social world for 30 years. She was warm to me at the dinner in the particular way that someone who is assessing you can be warm when the assessment has not yet reached its conclusion, the warmth of someone whose welcome is conditional on the outcome of the evaluation. Padraig, Connell's father, was quieter and warmer in the simpler sense. The particular warmth of a man who liked people and who had decided to like me without requiring extensive evaluation. Bridget, the youngest, was 20 at the time, still in college, with the particular quality of a youngest child who has grown up in the specific orbit of a strong mother, and who expresses herself in the particular indirect way of someone who has learned that her mother's attention is both sustaining and constraining. Connell's older sister, Awif, lived in Dublin and was present at the dinner by video call, which she joined from a coffee shop where she appeared to be doing several other things simultaneously. The particular form of presence that indicates someone is participating in the family occasion at the level they are able to give rather than the level the occasion might prefer. And Noreen's mother, Connell's grandmother, Mairead, who was 81 and who had been brought from her nursing home for the occasion, and who sat at the end of the table with the specific quality of someone who has been present for many occasions and who had long since stopped needing to perform anything for any of them. The dinner went well in the surface sense. The food was good. The conversation was managed skillfully by Noreen in the particular way of someone who is skilled at managing conversations, directing questions to the people who would answer them usefully, and away from the people who might answer them in ways that complicated the evening's specific social function. What I noticed, with the particular attention I brought to rooms and to people after years of sitting with laboring women and understanding that what was happening beneath the surface of a situation was usually more important than what was happening on it, was the specific quality of Noreen's questions to me. They were organized around assessment, not the friendly curiosity of someone getting to know their son's fiancée. The particular systematic inquiry of someone who was building a picture of a specific person relative to a specific standard, and who was measuring what she found against the standard as she found it. The standard, I came to understand across the dinner and across the subsequent months, was organized around the particular framework that Noreen had developed across 40 years of managing her family and its position in the specific social geography of Limerick, which was the framework of someone who valued the particular forms of social standing and professional achievement and family origin that she understood as conferring the specific quality she wanted for her son's partner. I was from Ennis. My father ran a hardware shop. I was a midwife, which is a respected profession, but not the specific type of professional achievement that Noreen's framework most valued, which tended toward the visible forms of achievement that produce particular kinds of social recognition. I was not from Limerick, which in Noreen's specific geography mattered in ways that were difficult to articulate, but that were entirely real. None of this was said directly at the dinner. It accumulated across the months of the engagement in the specific way that assessments communicated indirectly accumulate, through comments and questions and the particular quality of attention that someone gives you when they are continuing to assess rather than having completed the assessment. Connell noticed some of this and managed it with the particular care of someone who loved his mother and understood her limitations, and was trying to protect both his fiancée and his relationship with his family from the specific collision that the distance between Noreen's standard and me represented. He was not always successful. We married in the October of the year after the engagement, at a ceremony in Clare that my parents organized with the particular warm efficiency of people who had done this before, their oldest daughter having married 5 years earlier, and who understood that a wedding was a specific community occasion that required certain things, and that their daughter's happiness was among the most important of those things. Noreen was warm at the wedding in the specific way she had been warm at the engagement dinner, which was the warmth of someone who had completed their assessment and who had reached a specific conclusion, and who was managing the conclusion while continuing to present warmth. The conclusion she had reached was legible in the particular quality of her interactions with my family, which had the specific texture of someone being polite to people who were not quite what they had expected. I noticed and I did not address it because a wedding is not the place for addressing the specific texture of your mother-in-law's politeness to your family. The wedding was about Connell and me, and Connell and I were entirely happy on that day in the particular complete way of people who are marrying someone they are entirely sure about. We moved into a small house in the Anacotty area of Limerick, the particular practical choice of proximity to both our workplaces and proximity to the Donnelly family home that Connell found comforting and that I understood as a reasonable choice, and that I did not yet fully understand as the specific choice it was in relation to what happened 7 months later. The pregnancy happened in the spring of our first year of marriage. The particular unplanned but welcome arrival of something you had been thinking about but had not yet formally decided to pursue. The timing producing the specific combination of surprise and joy that unplanned welcome things produce. I was 26. Connell was 29. We were in our first year of marriage in our small house in Anacostia. A baby was coming. The first months of the pregnancy were the particular months that first pregnancies in healthy young women often are. The combination of physical adjustment and the specific wonder of understanding that the body is doing something extraordinary on its own schedule, and that your primary relationship to it is attention and care rather than direction. I was 26 and trained as a midwife and pregnant and happy, and I understood both the clinical reality of what was happening in my body and the particular human experience of what was happening in my life, and the combination of knowing both things simultaneously is the specific strange gift of the healthcare professional who is also the patient. Noreen was engaged with the pregnancy in the way she engaged with most things, which was with strong opinions and specific preferences, and the particular expertise of a woman who had been pregnant 3 times, and who understood that her expertise was relevant, and who communicated it with the confidence of someone for whom confidence was the default mode of communication. I managed her opinions with the patience that comes from being a midwife and understanding that first-time grandmothers often have a great deal they want to say about their grandchildren's arrivals, and that most of what they want to say is organized around care, even when it is delivered in ways that complicate the receiving of it. This management lasted until the Friday evening in February when I was 7 months pregnant, and when what I said to Noreen in her kitchen and what she said to me in the hallway were the specific things that are the beginning of this story. I want to describe the Friday evening in February specifically, and with the particular accuracy that it deserves, because the description requires honesty about more than what Noreen said. I had been at work at the maternity unit all day. A long shift, the specific kind of shift that a midwife who is 7 months pregnant and working the maternity unit has, which is physically demanding in ways that require the particular attention of someone who is managing her own body's needs alongside the professional demands of the work. I came home to the house in Anacostia at 6, and Connell was not home because he was at a dinner with work colleagues, and I had a specific tiredness that was not the ordinary tiredness of a long day, but the particular tiredness of someone who is growing a person and working a demanding physical job and who needed the specific thing that rest provides. Connell called and said Noreen had asked if I wanted to come for dinner, and that he had said he would ask. I should have said no. In retrospect, this is clear. The specific tiredness I was experiencing was the tiredness that required rest, and not dinner at my mother-in-law's house, and saying no would have been the honest response to what my body was communicating. I said yes because I was 26, and in my first year of marriage, and the particular social pressure of the mother-in-law's dinner invitation was something I had not yet developed the specific confidence to decline without guilt. I went to the Donnelly house. The dinner was fine in the surface sense. Noreen had cooked with the care she brought to cooking, and Padraig was his particular warm self, and Bridget was there, and the conversation covered the territory that family conversations cover over Sunday dinners. The difficulty began with a specific comment Noreen made about my work, the particular comment that revealed the specific assessment she had been making, and that she had until this evening managed to keep at the level of implication rather than statement. She said, to Padraig, but intended for me, and not making any particular effort to conceal the intention. I do worry about Sera working until she's so far along. The baby should be the priority. I had been working at the maternity unit until 36 weeks with the specific medical clearance of my consultant and the particular professional judgment that a trained midwife is well positioned to make about the appropriate timing of her own maternity leave. The comment was not about my well-being. It was about the specific idea that my work was in competition with my pregnancy for priority, rather than being part of the same life. I said, "I'm 32 weeks. The unit is fully supportive of me continuing until 36. She said, "I suppose you know your own limits." She said it in the specific way that "I suppose you know your own limits" means something different from what the words say. I said, "I do." There was a particular quality of silence after this exchange that had the specific texture of something that had been building for months, and that was now closer to the surface than it had previously been. What happened next is the part I want to describe most accurately, because the accuracy is what makes the rest of the story honest. I said something I should not have said. I want to say this clearly before I tell you what I said, because the story requires honesty, and honesty requires acknowledging that the evening was not simply a story of a wronged person and a wronging person. What I said was, "Noreen, I know you have concerns about how I manage my pregnancy and my work, and I'd prefer we talked about those concerns directly, rather than through comments that suggest I don't have my priorities right." It was the right thing to say in the sense that it named what was happening accurately. It was the wrong thing to say in the sense of the timing, which was in the Donnelly family kitchen with Padraig and Bridget present and Noreen in the middle of hosting a dinner, and it was the wrong thing in the particular way that right things said in the wrong context at the wrong time can produce wrong outcomes. Noreen said, "I'm simply expressing concern." I said, "I understand that. I'm asking for the concern to be expressed directly to me rather than through implication." What followed was the particular specific escalation of a family dinner that has reached the point where the things that have been unsaid for months are beginning to be said, and the escalation produced across the following 20 minutes of increasingly direct conversation, the specific statement from Noreen that is the center of this story. She said, "This is exactly what I have been worried about. This attitude. My son deserves someone who can put his family first, and I'm not sure that's what he has." I said, "I am putting my family first. My family includes my husband and my child and the work that provides for us." She said, "You always have an answer for everything. That's the problem." I said, "I'm not sure what you'd prefer. That I don't respond to what you say?" She said, "I'd prefer my son had married someone who understood how to be part of a family." I said, "I am part of this family." She said, "You are part of this family because of Connell, not because of what you bring to it." This was the specific thing, the particular statement that told me what the preceding months of assessment had concluded. That I was in the Donnelly family by virtue of Connell's choice, and not by virtue of anything I had or was or offered, which was the specific way of saying that I was there on sufferance rather than on standing. I left the dinner table. I went to the hallway, and I collected my coat and my bag. Noreen followed me. She said in the hallway with Padraig and Bridget in the kitchen 20 feet away, "You are not what I wanted for my son, and I want you to understand that. I will support him whatever he chooses, but I want you to know what I actually think." I said, "I know what you actually think, Noreen. I have known for months." She said, "Then you understand that you being part of this family is something you will have to earn, and that you have not earned it yet." I said, "I understand that you have decided I haven't earned it. I'm not sure I agree with your criteria." She said, "That is exactly what I mean." I called Connell from the driveway. He came home from his work dinner, and we had the particular conversation of a couple who have had a significant incident with one of their families and who need to discuss it with the full information that both of them have. I told him what had been said. All of it, including the specific thing I had said that had escalated the conversation, because he deserved the full picture. He sat with what I told him for a long time. He said, "I'm going to speak to her." I said yes. He said, "She was wrong." I said, "Yes." He said, "What she said about earning your place. That's wrong." I said, "I know." He said, "I'll speak to her." He spoke to her the following day. I was not present. He told me about the conversation afterward, and it had the specific quality of a conversation where the person being spoken to receives the content and manages their response toward a position of conditional acknowledgement rather than genuine revision. She had said she understood his concerns. She had not said she agreed that she had been wrong. The specific situation remained unresolved across the following 3 weeks. The particular unresolved quality of something where the immediate incident has been addressed without the underlying thing being addressed. And then, on a Saturday morning 3 weeks after the dinner, I came back from the supermarket to find a conversation happening in our kitchen that I was not supposed to hear. Noreen was in our kitchen. She had come, as she sometimes did, without calling ahead, the particular practice of a mother with a son who lived close by and who had not fully absorbed the specific implications of her son living with a wife rather than alone. She was saying something to Connell that I heard from the hallway before I announced myself. She was saying, "She is never going to fit. I have tried to make it work, and she is never going to be the kind of woman who fits with this family. I think you need to consider whether this is what you want for the long term." I walked into the kitchen. Noreen stopped speaking. Connell looked at me. The specific quality of that moment, the particular 3-way triangle of the kitchen with Noreen and Connell and me, and the specific thing that had been said and that I had heard and that all 3 of us now knew I had heard, is something I want to describe accurately because it determined everything that followed. Connell said, "Sera." I said, "I heard." He said, "I was going to." I said, "I know." I looked at Noreen. She did not apologize. She did not attempt to reframe what she had said. She held the specific position of someone who has been caught saying what they actually think and who has decided that the catching does not change the thinking. She said, "You were going to hear it eventually." I said, "Yes, I suppose I was." I went to our bedroom. I packed the specific things that you pack when you are 7 months pregnant, and you have just heard your mother-in-law recommend to your husband that he reconsider the marriage. I packed with the particular practical efficiency of someone who has gone past the specific emotional shock into the particular clear-eyed assessment of what the situation requires. Connell came to the bedroom. He said, "Sera, stay. Please. I'll ask her to leave. I'll make this right." I said, "Connell, I need you to understand something, and I need you to hear it completely." He said, "Tell me." I said, "Your mother has been telling you to reconsider our marriage. She said it in front of you directly. You did not call me to tell me, and you did not ask her to leave before I came home. The fact that I heard it before you could address it is not the most important thing here. The most important thing is that she said it and you were in the room when she said it." He said, "I was going to address it. I would have told you." I said, "Connell, what I need to know right now is not what you were going to do. What I need to know is what you're going to do now." He said, "I'm going to ask her to leave and I'm going to tell her that this cannot happen again." I said, "And then what?" He said, "And then we figure this out together." I said, "The figuring it out together requires you to be specifically clear with her about what is not acceptable. Not as a temporary position that she can manage around. As a permanent position." He said, "Yes, I understand that." I said, "I'm going to go to my parents for a few days. I need some space from this house and from this situation. That's not me leaving. That's me taking the space I need." He said, "I understand." I went to Ennis. What I did not know when I went to Ennis was that Noreen, in the 2 days after I left, said something to Connell that she had not said in front of me, which was the specific further thing that made everything that followed different from what it might have been. Connell told me what she said when I came back from Ennis after 4 days. She had said, "If she comes back to this house, I want you to understand that she is choosing her own pride over her child's well-being. A woman who would leave her husband's home at 7 months pregnant to go to her parents because of a family disagreement is not the kind of mother that child deserves. Connell said, "She said that to me." I said, "And?" He said, "And I told her she was wrong." I said, "What else?" He said nothing. I said, "Connell." He said, "I told her she was wrong, and that you were coming back, and that I needed her to accept that." I said, "Did she accept it?" He said, "She said she would respect my choice." I said, "Her choice of words. She said she would respect your choice." He said, "Yes." I said, "Not our house, your choice." He said, "Sera?" I said, "I'm not angry at you for the specific words she used. I'm trying to understand what she communicated and whether you heard what she communicated." He said, "I heard it." I said, "And?" He was very quiet for a long time. He said, "I don't know how to be what she needs me to be and what you need me to be at the same time." I said, "I understand that. I know that's the specific difficulty you're in, but I need you to understand that those two things are not equivalent requirements. What she needs from you and what I need from you are not morally equivalent things. I need you to be my husband. She needs you to choose her over our marriage when she decides our marriage is wrong." He said, "I know." He said, "I'm sorry." I said, "I know you are." We tried. Across the following weeks, with the particular determination of two people who are genuinely committed to each other and who understand that what is happening is serious and who are both trying to address it from their respective positions. The trying was insufficient. The specific reason the trying was insufficient is the one I want to describe honestly, because the description requires acknowledging that what ended our marriage was not only Noreen. What ended our marriage was the particular moment, 6 weeks after the kitchen incident, when Noreen said something to me directly about the pregnancy, the specific comment about whether I was managing the pregnancy in the way that was best for the child, and Connell, who was present, managed his response in a way that was not the clear and permanent position I had asked for. I understood in that moment that the particular thing I had asked for was not something he was able to give me at the specific level it was required, not because he did not love me, and not because he did not believe I was right, but because the specific history of his relationship with his mother and the particular way he had been shaped by that relationship meant that the permanent, clear position was something that required more of him than he had available to give. I left 2 weeks later. I was 7 months pregnant. I went back to Ennis. Let me stop here for a moment because I want to ask you something directly. Have you ever been in the specific position of leaving a situation that was wrong for you and that was also genuinely costly, and of understanding that the cost was real and that paying it was the right decision, and that understanding both of those things simultaneously required the particular kind of clarity that only arrives when the alternative is no longer available? Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. Because what I built in the 3 years between leaving Anacati and Noreen's phone call is the specific thing I want you to understand, and I want you to understand it in the full context of what it cost before I tell you what it produced. If you have not subscribed yet, please do. My daughter Aisling was born in Ennis on a Tuesday morning in April at the county hospital, attended by a midwife named Claire, who had known my mother for years, and who brought to Aisling's arrival the particular warm professionalism of someone who understood that this birth was happening in specific circumstances, and who was present for those circumstances with the full human attention they deserved. My parents were in the waiting room. My sister was in the room with me. Connell was not there. This was a decision I had made with the specific clarity of someone who had understood the situation completely, and who knew what the situation required, and it was the right decision, and it was also one of the hardest things I have done. He knew the birth had happened. He called. We spoke. The particular conversation of two people who have separated, but who share a child, and who are attempting to organize what the sharing requires in the first days of the child's life. He came to Ennis a week later to meet Aisling. The meeting was the particular meeting of a father encountering his daughter for the first time in the specific complex circumstances of a separation, and it was what it was, and I am not going to describe it in full because it belongs to Connell and to Aisling, and to me rather than to this story. Connell and I divorced the following year. It was as clean as divorces with a child can be when both people involved are committed to the child's well-being as the organizing principle of the process. He is a good father to Aisling in the particular specific way of someone who understands that being a good father is what the situation requires, and who provides it regardless of how difficult the providing sometimes is. Noreen has met Aisling twice in 3 years, at Connell's arrangement, and with my specific participation in the arrangement because Aisling deserves to know her grandmother, and the specific wrong Noreen did to me is not something I am willing to pass on to Aisling as a reason she should not know her father's family. This is not generosity. It is what the situation requires. I went back to work at University Hospital Limerick when Aisling was 4 months old, the particular return to work of a single mother who needed her income, and who needed her work, and who arranged childcare in the specific determined way of someone who has worked out that the thing that needs to happen will happen if she organizes it carefully enough. I was 27 and single, and the mother of a 4-month-old, and back at the maternity unit, and the work was the specific thing that organized everything else around it. The thing that required me to be competent and present and focused, and that produced from the requirement the particular professional engagement that I needed to be doing, rather than the particular static grief of sitting with what had happened. The work also produced, across the following 2.5 years, the particular cumulative professional record of someone who was very good at what she did, and who was doing it under the specific conditions that require competence rather than merely enable it. I was promoted within 18 months of returning. I took on the specific responsibilities of a senior midwife, and then the additional responsibilities of a clinical educator, working with student midwives in the particular way that midwifery education requires, which is both theoretical and deeply practical, and which requires someone who understands not only the clinical elements, but the specific human elements of what it means to be present with a laboring woman. I was good at the education work in the specific way that I had always been good at the clinical work, which was by bringing the full attention to both the knowing and the human dimensions of what I was doing. My students, who were mostly 21 and 22 and 23, received from me the particular quality of teaching that I had received from Bridie in the doorway of our bedroom in Ennis when I was 11 years old, which was the teaching of someone who wanted them to understand both the skill and the meaning of the work. Aisling grew. She was 3 when Noreen called. She had her father's eyes and my mother's way of laughing, which is the specific, loud, complete laugh that my mother has always had, and that I did not know, until Aisling produced it, that I had been hoping to hear in my daughter. I was 12 minutes from the Donnelly house. I drove with the particular specific attention that a midwife drives with when she is going to a home birth situation that requires immediate professional assessment, which is the attention of someone who is already thinking about what she might find and what it might require before she arrives. The Donnelly house was as I remembered it from the 3 years of my marriage, the particular house that I had been told I needed to earn my place in. I had not been inside it since the kitchen incident 3 years ago. Noreen opened the door. She looked at me. I said, "Tell me what's happening with Bridget." She stepped aside and let me in. Bridget was in the sitting room, on all fours on the floor, in the specific position of a woman in active labor who has found the position that works for her body and who is working through contractions with the particular focused concentration of someone who has found the thing she needs to do and who is doing it. I went to her. I said, "Bridget, I'm here. You're doing brilliantly. Let me assess." She said, "Sera, thank God." I did the assessment. 37 weeks, active labor, cervix 8 centimeters, baby in a good position, maternal vitals stable. The particular picture of an uncomplicated labor at 37 weeks that was progressing well and that required the specific professional presence and skill of a midwife rather than the emergency intervention of a hospital transfer. I said, "You're doing everything right. This baby is coming tonight and you're going to be fine," she said. "Are you sure?" I said. "Yes, I'm sure. I'm going to stay with you." I stayed. Padraig brought tea that no one drank. Noreen hovered in the doorway with the particular anxious presence of a mother watching her youngest daughter in labor and managing her anxiety with the specific management that it required, which was primarily staying out of my way. I worked with Bridget for 2 hours. The particular specific work of a midwife attending a labor, which is both clinical and human, and requires the continuous assessment of the clinical situation alongside the continuous human presence of someone who is keeping the laboring woman informed and supported, and who is managing the specific professional relationship that labor requires. Bridget's son was born at 11:47 on a Tuesday evening in April, in the sitting room of the Donnelly family home in Anacostia, with a weight of 3 kilograms and a specific loudness that communicated immediately and clearly that he had arrived and was not shy about it. I put him in Bridget's arms. She said, Oh, he's perfect." I said, "He is. He's absolutely perfect." Padraig, who was in the doorway, made a sound that was not a word, but that was the specific sound of a grandfather encountering a grandchild for the first time. Noreen was behind him. I did the post-delivery assessment. Baby healthy, Bridget stable, placenta delivered completely, no significant blood loss. The particular clinical picture of an uncomplicated home delivery that had gone exactly as a well-attended home delivery at 37 weeks should go. I called the community midwife and reported the birth. She said she would come by in the morning for the follow-up assessment. I called the maternity unit and updated them. Then I cleaned up with the particular methodical efficiency of someone who has done this many times and who understands that leaving a birth environment in the specific condition it requires is part of the professional responsibility. Bridget was feeding her son. Padraig was sitting on the floor beside her with his arm around her shoulders in the particular posture of a father who has just watched his youngest child become a mother. Noreen was in the kitchen. I want to tell you about the conversation in the kitchen, because it is the specific conversation that the story has been building toward, and that I want to describe with the accuracy it deserves. I went to the kitchen to wash my hands. Noreen was standing at the sink with her back to me. I said, "Noreen?" She turned. She had been crying. Not the performed crying of someone managing their emotional presentation, but the specific real crying of someone who has been in the presence of something significant and who has been moved by it in ways they did not fully anticipate. She said, "The baby is well." I said, "He's perfect. Bridget is well too. She did brilliantly." She said, "Yes." She said, "Sera, I need to say something." I said, "All right." She said, "What you did tonight, coming here." I said, "Yes." She said, "After what I said to you, when you were pregnant with Aisling." I said, "Yes." She said, "I said you were not good enough for my son and that you needed to earn your place in this family." I said it to your face, and I said it to Connell, and I said it in my kitchen when you were not in the room but close enough to hear. I said, "Yes." She said, "I was wrong." She said it in the specific way of someone who has said something many times in their head and is saying it out loud for the first time, and who is not managing how it sounds because the saying of it is more important than the sound of it. I said, "Yes, you were." She said, "I should have told you before now. I should have called you when Connell told me Aisling had arrived. I should have done many things differently." I said, "Yes." She said, "Why did you come tonight?" I said, because Bridget needed a midwife and she asked for me specifically. She said, "That's the professional reason." I said, "Yes." She said, "Why did you come?" "The other reason." I sat with this question for a moment. I said, "Because Bridget is Aisling's aunt, and Aisling has a relationship with her aunt's family through her father, and because what you said to me 3 years ago was wrong, but it was not a thing I am going to pass on to Aisling as a reason she should not have her family, and because the person I am is not determined by what you said about who I am, and because Bridget needed someone tonight, and I knew how to be that someone." Noreen said, "All of that is true." She said, "But there is a simpler version." I said, "There is." She said, "You came because it was right." I said, "Yes." She said, "Even though it cost you something." I said, "Coming here tonight cost me something, yes." She said, "What did it cost?" I said, "The specific effort of putting aside 3 years of something that was very hard in order to do what the situation required. That cost something." She said, "I am sorry for the 3 years." I said, "I know." She said, "I am sorry specifically for what I said in the hallway. Not good enough for my son. That is the thing I most regret saying, because it was the most specifically wrong." I said, "Yes." She said, "You are better than I deserved for my son." That is the specific truth. She said it in the particular direct way of someone who has been preparing a specific true thing and who is saying it rather than managing it toward a more comfortable shape. I said, "That is generous." She said, "It is accurate." I said, "Noreen, I need to tell you something about Aisling." She said, "Yes." I said, "She knows who her grandmother is, on Connell's side. She knows you by name. She knows you are Connell's mother. She has met you twice, and she is 3 years old, and she calls you Grandma Noreen because that is what Connell has told her to call you." Noreen said, "Yes." I said, "The reason she knows you and the reason she calls you that is not because I have forgiven you for what you did. I have not fully forgiven you, and I want to be honest about that. The reason is that Aisling's relationship with her father's family is not the same thing as my relationship with you, and I am not going to damage the first because of the second." Noreen said, "I understand." I said, "What I want, going forward, is for you to be a grandmother to Aisling in the specific real way, not in the managed way of someone appearing for the appropriate occasions. Aisling deserves grandmothers who are present and honest. That is what I want." Noreen said, "I want that too." I said, "Then we start from tonight. We don't erase what happened. We start from tonight with the specific acknowledgement of what happened, and we go forward from there." She said, "Yes." She said, "Sera, the watch Connell gave you. The one his father gave him when he turned 21. I said, "I left it behind." She said, "I know. I have it. I have kept it for 3 years, meaning to—" She stopped. I said, "Give it to Aisling. When she is old enough, tell her it was her father's and that it came to her through her grandmother. That's the right story for it." She said, "Yes." She said, "You're sure?" I said, "Yes. Things belong to the people they belong to. The watch belongs to Aisling's family story. That's where it should be." She said, "Yes." I said, "I have to go back to the unit." She said, "Yes." She said, "Thank you. For tonight." I said, "Take care of Bridget and that baby. Call the community midwife in the morning if you have any concerns." She said, "I will." I went back to the unit. I want to tell you about the weeks after that Tuesday evening, because they are part of what the story produced, and they deserve to be described. Noreen called me on the Thursday after the birth. She said Bridget and the baby were both well, and that the community midwife had visited, and that everything was as it should be. She said, "I want to ask you something." I said, "Yes." She said, "When Bridget is settled a bit, would you come for dinner?" Just dinner, not managed, not an occasion. Dinner, I said. I'll think about it, she said. That's fair. I thought about it for a week. I spoke with Connell about it, because the specific geography of co-parenting and shared family occasions meant that his perspective on whether dinner at his mother's house was something the current situation could sustain was relevant. He said, "It's your decision. I'll support whatever you decide." I said, "If I go, will you be there?" He said, "If you want me there, yes." I said, "I want Aisling to be there. And I want it to be something she understands as her family being in the same room together. Not a performance of that, but the actual thing." He said, "Then I'll be there." I went to dinner at the Donnelly house 6 weeks after the birth with Aisling, and Connell was there, and Padraig was there with the particular warmth he had always had, and Bridget was there with the baby, and Noreen made dinner. It was not a resolved situation. I want to be honest about that. The dinner was the beginning of something that would take much longer to become whatever it was going to become than a single dinner could produce. Noreen and I were careful with each other in the particular way of people who are building something from a starting point that required specific acknowledgement of what had happened before it could be a starting point. The specific thing that made the dinner possible was not that Noreen had apologized, and not that I had forgiven her. It was that we had both, in the kitchen on the night of Bridget's baby, said the specific true things that the situation required, and that having said them, we had a foundation for something that was at least honest, even if it was not yet anything more than that. Aisling sat on Noreen's lap after dinner, and Noreen read her a story from the specific collection of books that Noreen kept for grandchildren, and Aisling fell asleep in Noreen's lap, with the particular complete trust of a 3-year-old who is determined that the lap she is in is safe, and who does not require more than that determination to sleep. I watched this, and I thought about the specific cost of the 3 years, and about what they had produced, which was not a resolved situation, but a specific foundation for one, built from the particular combination of accurate record-keeping and professional competence and the specific willingness to do what the situation required, even when the situation was the specific one you would never have chosen. My father fixed things. My mother fed people. I caught babies and I kept the record and I did what the situation required. The baby in Bridget's arms. The dinner at the Donnelly house. Aisling on Noreen's lap. It was a beginning. Here is what being told you are not good enough at 7 months pregnant and building your own life from the cost of that telling taught me. I know that the specific professional competence you build through doing difficult work in difficult circumstances is the particular form of self-evidence that cannot be argued with. Noreen said I was not good enough for her son. The maternity unit, my students, Bridget, and the particular community of women I have attended across 3 years of work have all communicated, through the specific mechanism of what the work produced, that the statement was wrong. The work is the answer, not the most important answer, but an answer. I know that the child you protect from the specific wrong that was done to you is the child who has the relationship she deserves. Aisling knows her grandmother on her father's side. She knows her Aunt Bridget and her new baby cousin. She knows Padraig, and she will come to know all of the Donnelly family in the specific, ordinary, ongoing way that children come to know the people who are their family. She knows these people because I made the specific choice not to use what was done to me as a reason she should not know them. That choice cost something, and it was the right choice. I know that the particular kind of apology that Noreen gave me in the kitchen after Bridget's baby was born, the direct and specific one without the management toward a comfortable shape, was worth more than the many indirect and managed acknowledgments that I had received over the 3 years preceding it. The specific apology was possible because the specific circumstances of the Tuesday evening in April had produced the conditions for it, which was a circumstance where Noreen had seen me do the thing she had said I was not good enough to do, which was to be the kind of woman who put family first. I had put family first. Not in the way she meant when she said the words, which was the way of someone who subordinates herself to her husband's family's preferences. In the specific way that actually means something, which is the way of someone who comes to the house where she was told she was not good enough because the person in that house needs help, and because doing what the situation requires is what putting family first actually means. And I know that Aisling, who is 3 years old and who has her father's eyes and my mother's laugh, is the specific, most important thing that came from everything that happened, not as a compensation for what was hard, but as the particular real thing that exists entirely on its own terms, and that required all of it to become itself. She fell asleep on Noreen's lap. That is a beginning. That is my story. 7 months pregnant in the rain outside a house in Limerick. A daughter born in Ennis. 3 years of building something from the specific cost of what happened. A phone call on a Tuesday evening. A baby born in a sitting room in Anacostia. A kitchen conversation that said the specific true things. And a 3-year-old on a grandmother's lap, asleep with the particular complete trust of someone who has determined that the lap she is in is safe. If this reminded you of something you built from the specific cost of being told you were not good enough, and of the moment when what you built answered the telling in the most specific and direct way available, I want to hear from you. Drop it in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to know that doing what the situation requires, even when the situation is the one you would never have chosen, is the specific form of strength that builds the things worth building. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.